Okay, I'm here with Shogo Jusino. I appreciate your time and thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure, actually. It's kind of like a important thing you're doing that not, people have, I'm sure, thought of, but haven't really had an opportunity to tell their stories or anything along those lines, especially with the way you're going about it, mental health and things of that nature. So that's pretty important considering some of the stories that have been happening, kind of behind the scenes that we
Mhm.
don't really know about or hear about. So this is great.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have shared that perspective of they really hope it can help other people. So yeah, very genuinely, thank you for your time and I'll let you lead it off. I've kind of given you the format most people use, but it's your time, your story. Just walk us through it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess a little about me. Prior to, me joining the military, I was raised in a military household. Father was in the Navy, and I'm raised in that strict, like old school military-esque household. So I mean, everything had a way of being done. Everything had a certain place. It was pretty strict, kind of abusive, like compared to today's standards. But I mean, I feel like that was the norm back then. And then just kind of growing up, figured at some point I did want to join the military, just didn't know the exact moment I did. And, you know, while I was in high school, it was considered. I did take the ASVAB and things of that nature. But then my dad probably gave me the best advice, I guess, in my lifetime, in a sense, from him. And that was essentially to, if I wanted to join the military, at least go to college and then go in as an officer. So he understood from the enlisted side, and it's pretty rough. Like the freedoms that you wanted weren't necessarily there, especially just starting off. Um, so took that into consideration, put my ambition to join the military on pause. Went to college in New York, a small little private college, Manhattanville. My older brother was going there at the time, so I figured it might as well be somewhere near family. And you know, graduated with an international management degree, minored in Asian studies. I mean, realistically, I wish I did something else. Kind of like in hindsight, what have I really done with that degree up until this point? Realistically, nothing. So I feel like, the school system kind of does let you down as far as, your counselors are supposed to guide you in a certain way, right? See what your interests are. But fortunately, that never happened. And then when I graduated from college, it was roughly 2008, give or take. And that was when the economy was pretty bad. Like that was the whole recession or the housing market crash, the subprime mortgaging, things of that nature. So realistically, the only jobs I could find in New York were more sales related. And I'm not a very charismatic person. I mean, you've talked to Demona, you know that guy. He loves to talk. So unfortunately, that's not me. So that those sales positions, I tried one of them, couldn't do it. I gave it one day and quit. So then from there, I did construction for about a year or so with a union. It was good, the pay was great. However, it's not something I really wanted to do long term. So I decided, why not give the military a try now? So I submitted a packet for OCS and then went through the whole panel interview. It was myself and one other guy. He failed the interview. I managed to, pass. And then we kind of had a discussion about like why, like what was my interview like compared to his. And apparently they had told him that he just didn't have enough military history in the sense of kind
Wow.
of lineage wise, like his like generationally. So I mean, just for that, to be, the factor that they told him, it's just a little insane to me. But unfortunately, my cousin, my uncle, my dad, we do have like a relatively big military history or family. Um, so I got in there. I originally wanted to be an aviator, but I got tricked like most people. The recruiter was like, "Yeah, once you're in, you go in basic, they'll square you away then." So I took that with a grain of salt. Should have pushed it when I had the opportunity, but didn't. So then it turned out going through OCS. Um, Man, it was challenging. There's a lot of as you say candidates that were there. It was overcrowded essentially. So then they based the class sizes. They expanded the class sizes. However, there were still so many of them. It was based off of your PT scores that you would get into class. So you had to get like high 290, 300 essentially to even get into the class. So very competitive. Managed to get in. It was overall the experience was great. And then as far as picking like your branch or where you wanted to go through your MOS, I guess you can say, that was also based off of the order of merit list. So when we are doing kind of like the calculations and everything, there were only 5 engineer slots available. At the time, I didn't want to be an engineer. I wanted to be a tanker. So, this so one candidate that was in my platoon, actually, she wanted to be an engineer. And the day prior to us selecting our branch, I was talking to my cousin who was in the Marines and then transferred over to the Army. He was telling me about the engineer branch and how awesome it was. He essentially just talked it up. And he's like, "Oh, you got to blow shit up. It'll be fun." So I was getting behind that. I was like, "Oh man, this is great. That's what I want to do." Um, and then sure enough, the next day I picked engineering and I screwed that one girl out of the slot. So she was not happy about it. I forget what branch she ended up going into, but yeah, she was pretty pissed off. Apologized to her, but I mean, that's all I can do.
Mm.
I mean, you kind of just fuck the buddy over, but I mean, it is what it is. So then going to the 14th Engineer Battalion, I believe I arrived there sometime in December of 2010, I believe. Feel like that's when a majority of like the new lieutenants were coming in. My first unit was with 610 under Captain Lau or Sharice Lau. 22nd, 22nd Captain, Captain Lau's wife. So I remember going in there, kind of doing the whole salute, introducing myself, and that there's no position really open for me. I was kind of just excess. So she threw me down in the supply room as a lot of you know a lot of officers go to. They're either supply room or maintenance, right? So she threw me down in the supply room. At the time, there was only one specialist there, and I mean, he was not happy to see me. Right? It's just one guy now. I mean, I give it to him, man. Supply room is it's a thankless job, a thankless position. So I mean, he always had like so much to do as far either just hearing shit from the platoon sergeant, ordering supplies, having to go pick him up and just sorting everything out. It was a lot of work on his end. And then managing whatever computer system that he had. And then now a new lieutenant coming in there, him having to teach me what he knew and what his daily cycle and everything like that was. So I tried to work with him as best I could. Eventually we did get a staff sergeant, I believe it was Sergeant Mata, to come in to like help the supply room as well. That definitely helped out a lot as far as especially since we were prepping to deploy. So getting all the equipment, especially for the vehicles and things of that nature that we needed, getting everything set up. They're able to forget where you store what the word was or the phrasing to like store your vehicles and equipment. But that was like the big goal at the time. So I mean that was a lot of work. But I think in the end we kind of managed, and whatever my input was, did I really do anything? Not necessarily, but I helped streamline things, try to organize things the best way possible just to make sure everything ran smoothly. But outside of that, I mean, my primary position was to be the COIST, the company intelligence support team. New concept that was being built up within companies. Essentially, our job was to like analyze any intel, going up and down. However, as far as training and how to set it up and what like the TTPs and all of that were non-existent except what was in a handbook. So even when we went to what's that place in California that you go? NTC.
Right.
Yeah. When we went to NTC, man, that was such a waste of time, honestly. We just learned about like the bats and hides, some of the programs, but realistically, nothing about, the workflow or how things should be run in that, little cell within the company. So when we deployed, it was realistically, it was just meetings and creating this little pamphlet that essentially was worthless, right? You just have like the SIGACs, you can identify named area of interest for like the platoon leaders and things of that nature. But I mean, yeah, that was such a pointless. I mean, it was worthless at the end of the day. The platoon leader would just come in, grab the packet we may have had for him, and then just walk out. Not even looking at it, not even asking any questions. I mean, every day when they got back from missions, we would always have some kind of meeting of that nature, and then I would always have a little section of like the SIGACs with the last 24, and then what the next 48 were, or the prior 48, and then the next 24 potential, and it just kind of again reviewing like battle space and things of that nature, what you would expect. But that position definitely was for a senior lieutenant, one that just had come finished platoon leader time. That's what it should have been. But I mean, I did what I could, and then when we deployed, it was a lot of the same thing. I eventually found out that I would be replacing Lieutenant Kennedy. He was in the 520th that was supplementing 610. However, while I was there, they because the 22nd, hearing, yes, you can maybe backtrack a little bit, I guess.
Yeah,
So
before you
yeah,
get into the deployment, I had some
sure.
questions, so I don't want to jump too far ahead and just clarify. Are you ready to transition into the deployment piece?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, realistic, I didn't even do anything at home station, right? So
Well,
I
I
just
had
sat on my
questions
ass.
about that just before you got to the deployment piece.
Yeah,
So
yeah, sure.
you can continue, but before you start talking about Afghanistan, I just want to ask some questions.
Yeah, yeah. So
Okay, so the first one, like, was 610, were they a route clearance company or I don't really know what they were doing the prep. You said you were in Coy specifically. Was
right.
the company a route clearance company or what were they?
So they were I mean, 610 ESC, right? Engineer Support Company, essentially. However, they were redesignated like route clearance. That's what they were preparing for. NTC, they were doing route clearance missions and things like that. So yeah, so the whole battalion, route clearance. That's what we were training for. So
Okay, and
I,
I mean, at my level, I wouldn't have known. I was so narrow in scope. I had no idea
right,
what.
right,
And then
absolutely.
in Kois, that's a really interesting position to be in. Were you getting fed intel about where you were going to deploy in Afghanistan, and what kind of information were you getting, if you did?
Oh man, I think we had. I think we had maybe one meeting, if anything, in regards to like our AO. I think people from Afghanistan, they had come over from our AO. We had like a meeting, like a secret. Honestly, I don't know, one maybe that's it. Do I remember anything about it? No, not now. I mean, I feel like too much time has passed, so I vaguely remember one meeting.
Okay, how did you feel about the preparedness to go to Afghanistan? And that's kind of a two-part question. One, how do you felt preparedness as a company? And I'd also like to know personally, did you feel prepared and what did you do to get ready to be gone for a year and get ready for this?
Yeah, as far as the company as a whole, that I can't really. say because I was, so narrow. Like my scope was so narrow. Like I had no idea what the platoons were doing. Um, just that everyone was off in their own little world. Me, I just had to focus on like supply, right? So NTC, again, just doing the whole COIS thing. Didn't know anything about what they were training on, and whatnot. I mean, I knew they were doing missions, but outside of that, I mean, what level of preparedness overall? No clue. Like yeah, I mean, I keep talking in a circle, but realistically, yeah, no idea overall how prepared they were. But as far as me personally, I mean, you were so limited on what you could prepare for as far as my mission there as a Koist. Like, there's nothing you can do, right? I mean, I forget what building it was on JBLM that you can go to where they did have like SIPR access. So you were able to kind of see what was happening.
Mm,
And I did go there at least once a week just to kind of, you know, review everything that had happened. But outside of it, like the SIGACs, like IED here, IED there, IED found, what type of IED was it? I mean, outside of that, that's all the information you were able to get or gather. So you weren't able to talk to anybody in real time to ask them about what was happening or anything along those lines. So it was just based off of that, those significant events. So uh job wise, couldn't really prepare myself. But personally, I mean, I didn't really have like a girlfriend or anything along those lines, kind of made that a point. So I just go out there, focus on myself more than anything else. I told my family I wouldn't be talking to them realistically. I mean, they might get an email from me every now and then, but for the most part, I just wanted to, 100% be mentally focused in Afghanistan. I didn't want any of the outside issues, bothering me. I mean, first time going to war, right? Like, I don't know what to expect. So, I mean, the dangers that come with it, yeah, just wanted to be completely in the zone over there in Afghanistan. So,
and how old were you?
ooh, this is 2011. Is it? Oof, 25?
Okay, you're like it's funny when you do the age range, like a little bit older for being in the military. So, I mean, did you have any anxieties around it? Like, how did you feel about going to Afghanistan?
I mean, go first going to the unit and then being told, hey, we're deploying in like 6, 7 months. You know, you always knew like that was going to happen. You're always told that every unit is deploying. The likelihood of you actually deploying are very high, more or less guaranteed. So, and part of me was expecting it. However, once you hear the words, right, like you're actually going to deploy, it was a little worrisome, right? Like then it doesn't necessarily hit you until, you know, you actually start getting loading up and taking the bus to the airport and things like that. And then you realize like, oh shit, this is really happening. Um, I mean, I feel like it was maybe a little easier for me again, just because I just had to focus about myself, right? Or just worry about myself. Whereas everyone else, you see them with their families, their children, significant other, then, they're crying. Meanwhile, I'm just, have my bag on my back, ready to go. Um, but I mean, anxious at the same time, pretty excited.
Okay.
I get to actually, experience. It's kind of like part of the military is going to war, right? Like that's the expectation or like what the history is. So you, you go in with the expectation that you're going to war, especially during that time frame. So I mean, you just kind of accept it as it is.
Okay. And those are all the questions I had pre-deployment.
Um, all right, as far as like arriving in Afghanistan, I don't really remember much of it. I just remember we stopped off in Germany. Do you remember that? And then from there, I think was it Kuwait that you go to? No,
That's on
prior
a
to
leave. No, it was
that's
Kurdistan.
leave.
Kyrgyzstan.
Kyrgyzstan, yes. I remember Kyrgyzstan being incredibly hot. Like
Mhm.
the, it's like you would think with the wind blowing, you would feel cooler, but you're actually feeling hotter. Like, what the hell is this? It's like a brand new experience for me. Um, but yeah, outside of that, don't really remember much. Like landing in, maybe we landed in Kaf or Kandahar, and it just seemed like, war wasn't going on. Everyone was just kind of in their like PT uniforms and, their little reflective belts. Why we always had to wear that just still blows my mind. But yeah, I mean, didn't feel like anything special. Like you see some like damage, like structure that, obviously was hit by some kind of artillery or whatever it may be. But outside of that, and I was like, man, they have restaurants, they have little shops, and then you just see like you go to the latrine, you're like, oh, glory hole this, call this number. And then it was like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
So it was interesting. And then, we flew into, oh man, where were we? Sakari Perez, I believe, is where we flew into. That's where 610 was stationed. Uh, we had, 570th. We were told that, our area was highly kinetic. So we were supplemented with, a fourth platoon, 570 Sapper Company. I forget which platoon that was specifically in 570. First platoon, I believe. Um, or maybe second platoon. So many years have passed by now, you just forget a lot of things. But whichever one, Lieutenant Kennedy's platoon. Um, so he was with us. We were doing, turned out like that AO was not as kinetic as they mentioned. Clearly, like, doing the whole Kois thing, you can tell everything that was happening in like Fob Pasab in that general area where 22nd was, hearing all the reports of like all the recoilless rifle action and fire that everyone was receiving, and all the IEDs. It's much more happening there than Sakari Perez. And then as couple of months passed, you guys, I think the 22nd, you guys were pretty much like your vehicle status was like red across the board. I think you guys didn't have very many left. You guys were constantly going out on missions with what, you know, vehicles you did have remaining. So believe that's when it was decided that Kennedy would, go over and supplement you guys out there. Um, so I want to say not too long after that, I was told that I would be, replacing Kennedy. And at the time, it was a little frightening, right? 'Cause, me being the Coist and hearing everything you guys were, coming in contact with, I'm like, well, shit, that's what I'm going to be up against myself. So definitely a lot of nerves. It's very nerve wracking. And, I think from there, I continued to do what I could as the Coist, but I was focusing a lot more on what was happening on your guys' AO. I was talking to NJ a lot, right? Just kind of getting an idea of what was happening. And then you couldn't really prepare much, but, you know, when I went over there and replaced Kennedy, Kennedy became the XO. But then obviously we have the left seat, right seat, right? Just prior to that, I think I only had 2 days of that, right? And that's not very much time at all, considering how kinetic that AO was. So it was definitely learning a lot in a very short amount of time. So I believe the first day we went out, hit an IED, and then it was, that first explosion I experienced. I was like, damn. And you see, I think it was a route that had just gotten cut. So I think it was like the moon dust or like the fine particle, like dirt that was there. You literally just fall in and disappear. So it was just a plume of dust and smoke and everything that came out of that on top of, the vehicle that got hit. I mean, just Kennedy immediately going to work, like letting everyone know what to do. And there's just it was just like a seamless transaction between like everybody, right? Everyone knew like their role and what to do, how to go about doing it. Meanwhile, I'm just, stuck in like the back of a vehicle, just trying to like lean my head over to kind of look out the window to see what was really happening. But I try to absorb as much as I could. I asked Kennedy as many questions as I could, talk to the Joes, and try to get their perspective on everything. And really, the day two, maybe I don't think we came across anything on that day, and that was it. Like from there, Kennedy handed me the ropes, and yeah, I just took
I,
over.
I'd like to ask, what month are we in at this point, just for reference?
Now, oof, this me taking over probably October, November timeframe.
Okay, and then I gotta say, coming from, I mean, you'd have to fill this in, but coming from Cloist to getting 2 days to learn how to be the lieutenant for a route clearance platoon seems insane. I mean,
Yeah,
what
no,
was
absolutely.
I can't even fathom, like, did you feel prepared for that? Was that just overwhelming? Like, just a bit more on that. That is, I don't think like viewers could appreciate that. That's crazy. But I mean, what
Yeah,
was your experience?
I mean, it was very much overwhelming, and it's so much information. Like, right, there's so many moving pieces that need to happen in a route clearance package. That yeah, 2 days. I mean, I brought it up with Captain Lau. I want to say that's where we honestly first started butting heads, right? 'Cause realistically, 2 days wasn't enough time. You guys came in and ripped with, the outgoing, route clearance. I believe you guys had at least a week or two, right?
Well, yeah, but we'd also trained together for months and months before we
Exactly.
started going, right?
Yeah, so I mean, you guys had all of that, like all the training leading up to the deployment. Then you had at least 2 weeks to train with, the team. I mean, really, I honestly didn't know what the fuck I was doing, right? If I'm being honest.
Right. Yeah.
However, yeah, I mean, you kind of learn some things, prior to deployment, like NTC, like kind of get an idea of what route clearance was. And you kind of talk to the lieutenants, and they kind of let you know, inform you of how they perform like their route clearance, what to consider, things of that nature. But yeah, it's completely different once you're right there in the thick of it all, right? I mean, it's so much information, so much you have to pay attention to that it very much is overwhelming. I mean, drinking from a fire hose is
Yeah.
doesn't do that justice at all. So yeah, I mean, yeah, Captain Lau and I butted heads over that. I was mentioning to him that 2 days is enough time, but he said, it is what it is, do it. But I mean, it's also where you kind of just rely on, your NCOs and like the soldiers that have done all the training, right? That have prepped up until that point. So I relied very heavily on them. I believe at the time the platoon sergeant may have been Sergeant Aaron's, and then not too long afterwards, Sergeant Smith, he was the first squad leader. He stepped up as the platoon sergeant. Also a young guy. I want to say we were about the same age or so. Incredibly smart. I mean, he was on top of it. So he was quite possibly, the whole reason why I didn't fail initially, just because he was on it. He managed the guys. He knew what to do, and then, he kind of just sat me down, and we talked about like route clearance and what needed to be done. But realistically, I mean, I want to say the first couple weeks incredibly hard. I mean, relying solely on like the NCOs and everybody on how to go interrogate like IEDs, them asking me questions like, "Hey, what are we supposed to do?" I'm just like, "Oh fuck, man." So I mean, it's not that I didn't. I don't think I failed in a sense, but it was just a lot to take in, and kind of doing what I could. And again, having Sergeant Aaron and Sergeant Smith at the time just kind of support me in the way they did, kind of guiding me to the right answer. or what they thought was the right answer. It was, it was great. I mean, you really do. When they say like the NCOs are like the backbone of the army, it's very much true, especially in that situation. So
Yeah, that seems just extremely challenging. And then that's your platoon, and that, yeah, I think I I can't even imagine, although I can think about that and being put in that situation. And that's not in training, like you're there, it's game time, and you're
exactly.
right in that, and it's, yeah, that would be overwhelming, and every decision matters, and that, yeah, that seems like a lot to put on someone's plate, and you should be proud of yourself for that. That was a difficult situation to dig out of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mean, it's lives at stake now at this point, right? It's a game on type of thing. So yeah, we made it through. I mean, it worked out for the best. Yeah, sorry. We kind of from there, I guess, from that moment on, I did, Kennedy being the XO, it did help out quite a bit as well. So I was going to him, asking him questions. So that, you know, technically, the rip was over, like the transition was over, but I leaned on him a lot too, kind of get answered and, get his guidance on things. Um, and then as kind of like time passed, just we got into like a very good, rhythm. I'm more of a hands-off type of guy. I hate micromanaging, can't do it. So as we would come across IEDs, minimal talking on the radio, realistically. Like everyone knew what they needed to do already. They've been trained on it. So if anything, minimum input, but at the same time, those I was always thinking of ways to how can we improve what we're doing. Right. So I believe our fourth platoon, you guys, I mean, Toronto Route Toronto was the fucking worst. So I want to say we were like one of the first platoons that we actually just started going off the route, like into the where the field was to the north. We just started taking our vehicles out. Like we took our vehicles out into the field. We started dismounting eventually, and just trying to figure out different ways that we can kind of change things up, and be, as they say, like right at the bang versus just experiencing IED blasts left and right. And then it actually, like the tactics that we were doing, just it ended up, saving, I guess you can say, Glover, who was our Husky driver in one situation. I want to say this was maybe the 29th or so of December, so leading up to New Year's. So we had route Toronto for 3 days straight. And none of I was the moment I saw that on the schedule, I'm like, motherfucker, here we go. Um, that's where everyone was getting to record this rifle fire, and it's just like the intense, complex ambushes. So I think this day we decided that we're going to take the vehicles. Well, I guess we have 3 minutes left. Should we take a break here
Yeah,
and then?
I wasn't sure how far this was gonna go. Let's take a break here just to be safe, because there's nothing worse than it cutting off in the middle of it, and then we'll come back and continue that story.
Absolutely.
We're back. Go ahead.
All right. So again, the mission was 3 days on route Toronto. So at this point, it's one of those times where you speak to Demona, who was our coist at the time. It's kind of letting like, hey, usually the IEDs are here at this specific location, and then from there, the people are insurgents are usually on the north side where all the buildings and the mud huts and grape huts and things like that are. So kind of taking all of that into consideration and just kind of the terrain of it, kind of thinking of different ways we can kind of approach this. So I decided, I guess this is a good time to kind of introduce Sergeant P, Sergeant Povolitis. So he was always one that, wanted to be on the ground. It was like, oh, ground, ground, ground. I want to be the one to dismount and things of that nature. So kind of he started influencing me on how I wanted to run missions. Right. So in this particular case, just hard charger. I was like, why not? Let's give this dismount a try and see what happens. Like, I mean, worst that can happen is someone dies, but at the same time, we'll take all the precautions necessary for it. So in this particular case, once you turn, I forget what route leads to Toronto, but once you turn off of it, we decided to dismount more or less there. And kind of how we decided to set up our vehicles and things like that. We had on the actual route itself, we had the Husky with the GPR, and then we had a roller truck, the truck like an RG with the rollers behind. And then we only had two vehicles that were going to be on the route. And then in the field itself, we had A&A with us as well. So we had a total of five on the in the field. So we had we had our dismounts kind of in the center, and then flanking each side, we had facing in between, I guess you can say, the dismounts and all the grape huts and things like that on the north. We had three vehicles there, one being the Buffalo, the biggest that provide the most cover say if there was an engagement. And then we had the A&A truck, and then another RG. And then on the opposite side, it was my vehicle up front, and then another one other vehicle there. And then in front of the dismount team was another Husky that, we had the rake on there, just in case for any command wires. But we figured since it was a huge open field, the chances of, an IED or anything along those lines being there pretty slim, right? It's such a vast field. Like they would have to know exactly the route we were going to take and plant something there. But that's kind of how we set everything up. And then we just, decided to tackle the route this way. So we had the Husky all the way up front, and then the vehicles that were on the route itself, they were further back behind, just in case that rake pulled up any command wire. There's plenty of time for the dismounts to see it prior to, the vehicles actually getting to that IED on the road. And we were just, normal, normal mission, just kind of going along, everyone just paying attention. And there is a wadi that cuts from the village to the north all the way to the road. So, and that the vehicles couldn't pass, get past that particular wadi just because the wadis are relatively deep. And then the vehicles would get stuck, once the tires got in there. So that was kind of our, limit of advance. And as we were approaching that wadi, all of a sudden there's just a massive explosion that goes off. And then it was this crater that was left on the road was gigantic. Like this thing was huge. Um, so then everyone's like focused on that explosion on the road. Meanwhile, it turned out to be a command wire, and then the triggerman was in the wadi itself, but because of like all the tall elephant grass that was there, we couldn't really see him. So he managed to, get away that day. But so that was kind of that particular day. So day two, so that was essentially the 29th. So I say we kind of saved Glover in the sense that like this, that IED, should we have stayed on that route, not dismounting or going off road, we would have hit that. There's just like no. And just like the size of the crater itself, I feel like I could have laid down twice, and that would have been, yeah, that probably would have covered it. So, Glover was incredibly thankful, like, holy shit, if we didn't do this, that would have been me.
Mhm.
Um, so then day two, so this is now the 30th, we kind of like analyzed what had happened, the day prior, and thought, okay, so Triggerman was definitely in that wadi, tall elephant grass, we can't see, he's concealed. So what can we do about it? So this was the day we decided to bring, kind of talked to Captain Lau, kind of got clearance to bring thermite and burn it. So we decided to burn all the elephant grass within that wadi and essentially make it so we were able to see inside. So we did that again, kind of the same setup in regards to like the dismounts and things of that nature. So, they took the thermite once we got up to that wadi, took the thermite, just burnt it all down. Just burnt all the elephant grass, as far up as we could. And then, that was it. Like that was, day two, pretty straightforward, no IEDs on the road that day, and we called it good. So then now we're at New Year's Eve, and we're like, all right, everyone was talking about it. We did, IED day one, day two, nothing. And we just, took away their like ideal location to in place and then, hide for that IED to detonate it. So where everyone's thinking something's going to happen today. Like this is it. New Year's Eve, something's about to happen. So, again, we're like, all right, we're not going to change our TTPs at this point. We're not just going to be on the road, right? If something's going to happen, we need like boots on the ground. We need as much firepower as possible to, you know, to engage should just something happen. So again, same thing with the vehicles, and then like the dismounts in between the two vehicles off on the field. And then we had, again, the two vehicles on the road itself. And then as we're driving down the field, get kind of a report of like, I guess you can say like the yellow jugs that they use to stuff with HMEs or explosives. We've they spotted that just in the crater from the prior IED. So, we call more essentially we call an all stop at that point. And then the moment we stop, there's like an explosion that happens right in front of my vehicle. And we're just like, oh fuck, the hell is that? And then, you know, all this gunfire just happens. So it was, they were turned out to be an ambush. They planned it, and fair enough. That what we expected. Hell started to break loose. So Sergeant Smith and everybody, luckily there was another wadi that was kind of perpendicular to the one that the trigger man was hiding in. So the dismounts, they jumped into that wadi and it kind of took cover there and started firing back. Vehicles, vehicles were all trained their guns on like the grape hut where now we realize it was a recoilless rifle that fired and missed my vehicle. So they're firing at that grape hut. And to this day, I still hate the fact that we were told we needed the Mark 19s on the Crow system. Like we couldn't have, a human or a person, firing the Mark 19. So that, unfortunately, we didn't have that weapon system in our arsenal. Like that, it locked up in the Crow system. So the Buffalo was just couldn't engage at all because they were the ones with the Mark 19. And so in this whole process, we have like the Husky that was in front of the dismount with the rake. He had also the interrogation arm. So I had sent the Husky to go check out what the jug was in that crater. And meanwhile, this is while the firefight is happening and everything along those lines. Um, and then, it turns out like the Buffalo or the Husky couldn't really interrogate it that well. So we ended up needing the Buffalo. So I called the Buffalo to go over there and, interrogate it. Meanwhile, while it was interrogating it, the recoilless rifle like aimed at the Buffalo and ended up hitting the Buffalo. Fortunately, like the cage kind of did its job,
Mhm.
right? But so the cage initiated the detonation of like the rocket, and then you can see from uh, like the pictures we had took, it started like in the Buffalo itself. There were like three holes that started spinning into like the armor. And we're like, oh, that's interesting. But it did end up penetrating the Buffalo itself. And then, there was fragmentation that got inside the hull and everything along those like where all the passengers were. And I believe it was DJ, he actually got fragmentation in his shins. But he didn't. I guess it was also kind of comes up later on when we were back on base, but I guess it was cauterized at the time from like the heat and everything like that. So he didn't necessarily feel it per se. But at that point, we were trying to, my vehicle went up to the Buffalo to make sure everything was okay. See, but then and then as our vehicle gets there and I'm trying to get him on the radio, I see like Moyer like kick open the back door and he's fucking yelling and just is firing his gun at that grape.
Oh.
Yeah, he pissed off. Just,
Mhm,
and then
sure.
oh man, it was pretty funny. And then the driver, so they weren't answering the radio, so I had, Sergeant Spaulding was my driver at the time. He opened his door trying to get Moyer's attention, make sure everyone was all right in there. Turned out everyone was fine. But yeah, we couldn't get that Mark 19 up. And then they just, in the end, they just kind of kept interrogating, right? The vehicle was still working. They're checking that IED. Turned out it was a hoax. There's nothing in it, just rocks.
Hmm.
So this was a planned ambush. And then meanwhile, while we're doing that, firefights still happening, and I'm also talking to like the battle space, letting them know what's happening, and trying to coordinate, some kind of like air, like CAS or like the close air support. And you also wonder, first time at war, all of this is happening. How are you going to react?
Mhm.
I mean, some people are going to freeze. Some people just, freak out and kind of lose their shit. And others kind of go into that, steady calm where they're able to, still think and function and make sure everything's, lives are depending on it at that point, right? So, I mean, fortunately for me, I found out there that I kind of go into a nice little calm. So I'm kind of analyzing everything that's still happening, talking to the battle space when we're letting them know what's happening, calling close air support. And once they drop down to our frequency, the close air support, now here I am coordinating with them. And then on top of that, they have what's the little base, whatever that little cop was at the end of Toronto, they they actually sent out a QRF that also dropped down to our frequency. Now here I am talking to like multiple people at once, coordinating on top of like Sergeant Smith that's on the ground. So there's so many people like on one frequency. And it turned out everything worked out. No one was hurt. Once close air came on site, that's when all the firefighting stopped. Like it just got quiet. Yes. So one, once they came on site, quieted down, and then just talking to them, like, hey, how can you stay on site? We still need to finish clearing this road. And fortunately, they were able to stay on site for a little bit, and then we just kind of finished the interrogation, and then we just everyone kind of got up, and we just continued mission, and then right as we started doing that, as like, hey, we need to go. We have another mission that we need to go support. So I told them like, hey, once you guys leave, all hell's gonna break loose again. And they're like, we understand, but this is taking priority now. So they left. Sure enough, right when they left, again, like a minute or two later, you know, firefighting, like more gunshots, everything like that. So got back into the wadis, started opening fire again, and then again, all the coordination pieces happening again. Close air comes back. A moment they get, and then again they come back on site. Silence. So at this point, we're just like, fuck it. Now that the moment they got there, it got silent. We're just like, we need to finish this mission now. We need to get the fuck off this road. But I mean, we still had to clear the route, so we ended up clearing the route all the way to that cop, the CP, and then just hop back. Everyone hopped back in the vehicles. All the vehicles got back on the road, and we just bolted out of there. I mean, we picked up the pace and just drove right out. So that was our New Year's Eve. That was the fireworks for us. So the span of 3 days, I mean, that culminating event. I mean, luckily, again, no one got hurt. DJ, once we got back to base, we're just clearing our weapons. Then we kind of just made sure head Doc or Laniello, check on everybody from the Buffalo. And we just see like kind of blood stains on the back of his pants. And then we just took him to the aid station. He was back within an hour or so. But, I feel like we were all pretty lucky that day. It's good experience. Um, and I learned that day that home specialist Holmquist, Daniel Holmquist. Like you talk to the man and think he's not like the sharpest tool in the shed, right? But man, if he when he was on the ground, apparently he was just on it. Grabbed like the AT4s, tried to shoot it at the grape HUD. First one misfired. Then he just went and grabbed another one, just trying to do everything he can. And then Sergeant Smith had mentioned he was yelling at Holmquist because he couldn't fire that first one because it misfired. He's like, Holmquist, fire that fucking AT4. He's like, oh yeah, Sergeant. He was kind of like a Forrest Gump in a sense, but man, once shit hit the fan, oh my God, it's like all the training that he received prior to that point just all came back. And he was fucking a super soldier. So I think from that day forward, he was kind of like the guy that would provide security for me when I went on the ground. It's like, I want that guy. So he was awesome soldier. But yeah, that was that day. And kind of, we also, throughout the deployment, try to help out Demona as much as we could, as well as the company and the other platoons itself. He was kind of he had changed that hoist room. Like, so, I know NJ was there prior to, again, he was probably like me, didn't know what the hell to do. He was realizing it was a position for like a senior lieutenant. And then when Demona took over, like he changed it. Like there's sand tables, there's like more imaging, a lot more. He transformed it and gave us information that we can actually use, like actionable intel. And then he was always asking if we could provide like use the Puma, like a UAV,
Mhm.
to give him videos of like specific areas. So we had Sergeant Jimenez, one of our Puma operators. We try to incorporate that a lot more. Now we would go to like cops and just I mean, there's really no way to get a Puma in the air, but you needed like some kind of like movement, like you need to be in a vehicle to like throw it up in the air. So there was like one particular cop that always allowed us to use their golf cart. So we would jump in the back of that, just full speed, or try to have fun with it, and get the Puma up in the air. So we try to help out as much as possible. I feel like we gave them quite a bit of video feed, and we try to, and hopefully some good information came out of that. I feel like for fourth platoon specifically, never really helped out. Like I don't think we ever got anything out of those videos, but I remember Demona saying like it was very useful for him. So if it was useful for him, it was useful for someone else. So we just kept doing it. Um, and man, I guess the other memorable moments realistically was kind of now going off towards like the end of deployment with probably, Sergeant P. So with what happened to him. This is gonna be the hard discussion. I can already feel kind of the emotions here. But I mean, we were on I think a couple of days prior to us going on this route. I want to say it was maybe NJ's platoon that went down the route, and they like the culvert IED that detonated. So they like I think we took that route 2 days later, and because of that culvert IED, obviously we had to be careful once we got there. So again, kind of going with Sergeant P style, he's like, "Oh, let's dismount, LT, let's do it." So I was like, "All right, let's do it. We'll dismount, kind of check for we knew it was command wire, so we decided there's really no way to check for command wire unless we do get on the ground. So I think this route was, I think it was Victoria South. So we had ANA with us that day as well. So we had two dismount teams, one on the east side and one on the west side of the route. And I believe myself, Sergeant P, we were on the west side, and then we had a ANA and a few other guys on the east side. then as we were kind of going down the route, um, came over the radio that we got to the wadi, or where the culvert IED was, and that's when they saw, they found the command wire that was, leading to the culvert in the wadi. So that came over the net. So myself, everyone that was on the west side, then we kind of pushed over to the east side where they were. And sure enough, yeah, the command wire was there. And if we were going to kind of interrogate this area, I personally didn't want that wire to be live. So I told everyone to like kind of back up and that I was going to cut the wire. And you're not supposed to, but I decided, at that point, I was going to, if anyone was to cut it, it was going to be me. And the reason why we weren't supposed to cut it was because it was kind of like a dead man switch in a sense. If you cut it, there's potential for an IED, to detonate because the power was cut off. So I told everyone to back up just in case. And then I was like, well, fuck, this could be it for me. So I closed my eyes and cut the wire, hope for the best. And then everyone was like, oh shit, it sparked. So like, oh well, good. It's live. Now whatever was at the end of it, probably culvert IED that detonated. But I mean, I figured that was the wire for that culvert IED. But then just to be safe. And then we decided we were gonna go into the wadi and kind of interrogate it, like ensure that, that's where the wire was going to. So at that point we had the mine hound as well as the explosive ordnance dog, and the mine hound was overheating and we didn't have another one. So we essentially had no choice but to use the dog, um, and rely on the dog itself. So I talking with the handlers, like, hey, is the dog good? Like, is he good to, proceed with this? And he said he was fine. The dog was good to go. So we had the dog and the handler up front. I think it was Sergeant P and then myself kind of going into the wadi. I wasn't gonna have I don't say I wasn't gonna have anyone else go. No, if it wasn't gonna be me in there as well. So and then Sergeant P wanted to do it. So between us two, we decided, all right. We started going into that wadi, and then not too far, not too far in there, an IED went off, pressure plate IED, and unfortunately, it was Sergeant P that stepped on that and initiated it. I wasn't too far behind him, so I kind of got some fragmentation and um in my face and my arm. So and then I felt like that concussive force from it, and it didn't. I was rocked from it. It was definitely like ringing happening in my ears, and I just remember kind of like running to where that explosion was, and kind of seeing Sergeant P lying there. So it was hard to process. It's just from kind of that concussion I was suffering from, and kind of seeing him now, without any limbs, essentially, his legs. I just remember thinking like, where the fuck are his legs? His I believe his left leg was man, I think it was all the way up to his hip or so. Like that whole left leg was gone. I think that the right leg was maybe up to the knee, maybe a little higher. So, it's just, I get there, I see that, not understanding, and I'm just not comprehending it essentially, what's happening. And then I remember looking at his face, and, he's conscious. I see him kind of look down, and he knows what the fuck's happening. So, his last words were like, oh shit, and then kind of see the eyes like start rolling into the back of his head, and then he just closes his eyes. Um, so I At that point I'm trying to get, Sergeant Smith and, Dot Laniello, over to us. They're like the last vehicle. So I'm trying to get them on the radio. Nothing's happening. And then I look down and realize that my radio is broken. Like that, the IED actually destroyed my radio completely. So I called for Sergeant Van Leer, and then he came running. Fortunately, Specialist Churchman was already there, providing whatever aid he could to Sergeant P. And then I'm using Sergeant Van Leer's radio, uh, got a hold of Sergeant Smith. He was already, on his way, thankfully, but he wasn't going to run onto the road, right? So he had to cut through the fields, and there's, the tall grass. He had no idea where he was or where we were. So I had Sergeant Van Leer put, one of the smokes in his 203. We didn't have any smoke canisters with us. So he was like, just like, I mean, in order for it to initiate, you gotta, I don't know, it has to travel at least a certain distance, right? I believe. So I just told him to shoot it on the fucking ground. I didn't know if it was gonna work, but I just told him to shoot it on the ground. And he shot it on the ground, and luckily, the smoke initiated, so Sergeant Smith was able to find us, relatively quickly. And then the moment he arrived, I went over to the lead truck, and that's when I started calling for medevac. And from there, it's just a matter of like waiting. Like the line was called up, we were told that they were on the way, but I think from the timeline, from what I remember, it took about 8 or 9 minutes for me to call the medevac. So I mean, thinking about it, that's too much time, right? Especially for kind of the severity of what it, of the injuries that he sustained. So I mean, whether or not he was alive or if he passed away the moment his eyes closed, or whether he was still alive, and I mean, I personally don't know. I never really asked Sergeant Smith or Laniello. Just I just couldn't do it. Couldn't ask. I didn't. It's one of those things I just didn't really want to know. So I mean, eventually, I think they touched down, within like 15 minutes or so from the event starting. And then as far as what Laniello and Sergeant Smith were doing, once they got there, I personally don't know. I was in the truck, just kind of keeping in touch with the battle space at that point. So I mean, that was my role. And then it was pointless for me to even be on the ground at that point. Just be, I would just be a spectator essentially doing nothing. Um, yeah, once the medevac took off, we were just told to return to base, and that was it. That was it for the mission. And so we RP'd, kind of we still had to go through the motions, right? We stopped off at the gas station to fuel up our vehicles. When we did that, Lieutenant Kennedy was there, and this fuck man, it was his platoon. So I felt like I had let him down, that I fucked up. So I mean, I remember apologizing to him, for kind of letting him down. The level of the level of guilt I feel kind of to this day. It's still pretty extreme. It's so like there's a lot more that I could have done. I remember, you know, Lieutenant Kennedy wrote up the report for it for that particular day, and there's a section on there that's like what could have been done, or like what are TTPs that can be employed in the future to prevent this kind of thing from happening again. And he asked me if I can fill that out. And fuck, man, I just remember I just kept typing, just kept going. There's so much I put on there that I felt like could have been done, should have been done. Maybe we should have had that extra mind hound. Maybe I should have taken, the dog handler at his word. I remember maybe a few days later, like there was another dog handler in one of our meetings, and I just fucking laid into him. I just asking him a bunch of questions. Uh, and then I was kind of told by Captain Lau to back off, like back down. So yeah, that was rough. I mean, I honestly feel like I definitely let Kennedy down. I let down the platoon. I mean, Sergeant P he was an incredible man. Like he was one of those guys. If you're talking about like presence in any room, like the moment he walked in, everyone knew exactly who he was. He was just such like a happy guy. He connected with everyone, built a relationship with everyone. Like everyone, for an old man to have gone through select like the whole selection process, only be told, you're too old to to be special forces. I mean, it says a lot. I mean, that guy can endure a lot. And it was, yeah, I mean, he was he was the squad leader for first platoon. Everyone loved him. Everyone looked up to him. You know, I mean, sure, he was, I guess you could say a subordinate of mine, but he's also a good friend. I mean, we would go to the gym together. He's always kind of like cheering you on, right? It's like, oh, you can lift more than that, or you'd be like, that's it. He always had, he always had like, he would always say what, and whenever he said that, he had this specific mannerism with him, like how he would turn his head and all that. It was just hilarious. He always had like a dip in his mouth. Yeah, there was a time where Sergeant Smith went on leave, and then Sergeant Pulveritis was our platoon sergeant. So I mean, that week he was the platoon sergeant. It was great. I mean, great relationship. Stuff. I definitely had to be a little more hands on at that point. Usually, but I feel like we got along great. Everyone was saying we were like the father son type of duo. So I mean, it was good. We got into an argument once over how we did a mission, but that realistically, that probably was my fault. But the goal I had for that particular issue was a little different. I mean, I could go into that if I wanted to, but um, yeah. I mean, post that day, we we had someone, some kind of counselor of some sort, come in and sit down with the whole platoon. And realistically, that kind of fucking pointless. I mean, they just sat us all, the whole platoon, in like a little circle, and we just talked about what happened, and then that was really it.
Mhm.
They said, "Oh, if Sergeant P was here, you know, you he wouldn't want you guys to feel like this." I'm like, hey, what the fuck do you know at the end of the day, right? Like, you don't know who he was, and here you are just trying to give advice, and I feel like that's just like an umbrella statement, right, for anyone that suffered loss.
Mhm.
Um, but outside of that, you know, that was that was like all the support we got from the army. And that was it. But we still, and this was in May 31st. So just right after Memorial Day, right? So that makes it even harder. But yeah, we still had a month and a half left in theater. So we still had to, keep going on missions, going out. And I feel like at that point, if complacency was a thing, it was gone, right? I mean, we kind of like zoned back in a sense, and then we found it. We still managed to find every IED versus having to detonate on us. And there's always a thing. We had a competition with second platoon in regards to like the fines versus debts. Right. So I want to say we won in the end, but who knows? Um, but yeah, eventually we started to like rip with the incoming unit.
Let's
That
pause there for one moment. We got less than a minute,
okay.
and I want to hear about that, but I also have some follow-up questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we're back.
All right, so I guess to backtrack a little bit to answer your question in regards to how we managed to continue on um, post Sergeant P. Um, I feel like at the end of the day, with that shitty counseling that we received, I mean, the only thing we really could do was to rely on each other, for everyone to support each other. Everyone was hurting, right? So the best we can do is just comfort each other, and we did talk about it ourselves. I mean, they do say speaking about it is the best way to kind of resolve like the problems and issues that you kind of suffer and go through. Um, and we did do that. We did talk about it, but then at the same time, we knew, we did have to continue mission. And in kind of his honor, we wanted to, finish strong. Like we wanted to just find all the IEDs. We didn't want any more deaths to happen to us. So in his honor, we just kind of kept going, chugging along. And if anyone was like hurting, like we would all joke about it in the sense that we would kind of reflect on all the good things Sergeant P did for the platoon, and like our experiences with them, the good times we had. So that's kind of how we got through it. It was, again, just, I guess that it's the only option, right? To rely on each other. Like the platoon's all you have. So I mean, no one else, like even the other platoons, like they wouldn't, like just wouldn't understand or comprehend fully, right, of what Sergeant P meant to us. So yeah, that's kind of how we pushed forward, and it worked. So yeah, you just have each other in the end. So
Okay,
um,
and then yeah, kind of moving forward from that point. Yeah, how did the deployment end for you?
yeah, so we eventually got the new company that was going to replace us. And speaking, the rip was terrible in my opinion. The platoon leader I was with was one of those guys that didn't really listen and felt like he just kind of knew everything. And it fucking sucks. It's like one of those things like, hey, you need to start listening to me. And like, I've been here for a year. We've experienced this, just like we experienced loss not even a month ago. Right. So it's hard. It's difficult because like you in the end, the exact same thing is gonna happen to you. Like I'm trying to help you to prevent it. Um yeah, they mentally they none of them seemed like they were ready by the time we were done. And sure enough, kind of like down the road, I forget who had mentioned it, but they had said, yeah, that the replacement unit did suffer losses. And that was, I mean, it's early on into their deployment. So I mean, you can only do what you can. You can only you sit down, talk to them, but it's a matter of whether or not they want to listen. Unfortunately, that lieutenant just didn't. I don't think it's sunk in that, hey, this shit's real, and this is it. Like you need to get your mind right. So yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate, just because at the end of the day, you're gonna have to be the one, to look that person's spouse in the eye, and apologize and say, I fucked up. I mean, I mean, I'll talk about that, for the post deployment, but yeah. And then after the rip, as some of us were starting to go to calf and everything like that, I got word from the Red Cross that my grandfather had passed away. So, you know, in about month and a half, two people that I care about actually passing away. It, it sucks, it's very difficult. It compounds each other. And so I got on a plane and flew to Japan to kind of attend another ceremony, essentially. So I didn't experience any of like I don't know, whatever it is you guys go through for, redeployment back to the States. Like I didn't get any of that at all. I just handed all my gear to the Sergeant Smith, you know, and he kind of took care of everything for me, fortunately. Um, so by the time I got back to Washington, you know, whatever it is I was supposed to do, I didn't need to do, and it's kind of like slowly transitioned back into platoon leader and now 570th. So once the deployment was done, fourth platoon went back to its parent company, and at that point, I was more or less over being a platoon leader. Like that was it for me. I mean, I was done, but I had to. I remained a platoon leader. Oh shit, I don't know how long after that. And I was honestly, it's kind of a disservice to the platoon, but I was checked out.
Mm.
People started being replaced. People were going to new units, so the platoon wasn't the same anymore either. Um, I got a new platoon sergeant, Sergeant Novembre, if I remember correctly. Great guy. I mean, he honestly, if it wasn't for him, like that platoon would have gone to shit, if I'm being honest. So I owe him a lot, keeping that platoon together and keeping the training going. Um, Sergeant De Leon, he was the one that replaced Sergeant P that day. Also, he was first squad leader, and he also another great guy. I mean, watching him, kind of clear out Sergeant P's stuff, in Afghanistan, that was only imagine what he was going through,
Right.
right? I mean, because he was in the bunk essentially right next to mine. Like Sergeant P, all his shit was there. I'm sitting on the bed just like watching him clear it. You know, uh, but then I mean, he came in, you know, picked up the slack, and again, I owe him a lot too. Kind of, he comforted me where when it was needed and stuff. Said he was sorry, and him and I became like friends after that. It's no ill will towards him or anything along those lines. Um, Turned out to be a great guy. And while we were back at home base, is one of those things we had to hold like another memorial service for Sergeant P. And that was also when I met his wife, Kim Povolitis. And, that was incredibly difficult, to kind of come back to that point of, just looking the person's spouse in the eye and apologizing. Again, going back to the sense of guilt that I felt, it was my fault. Like I could have done so much more, to kind of prevent it. But I mean, she was fantastic. She just kind of gave me a hug and said it wasn't my fault. Yeah, it's kind of looking at his son too. He was there. It's hard. Even though she said it wasn't my fault, it's hard to believe that. 'Cause, I mean, I'm the platoon leader. The whole that responsibility is mine. So, I mean, I've yet to visit Sergeant P's grave. It's I know where it is, but I just can't I don't know, can't build up the courage to kind of go there and kind of face him in a sense. I feel like I haven't necessarily done enough, to kind of make up for a sacrifice. You know, one day, I hope I can. I hope I feel like I've helped people enough or I live my life enough, to kind of go there and just face them and apologize. But I mean, yeah, through it all, I mean, that incident also, as I said, I was checked out of the army. I wanted to leave. I was done with it. So, I mean, we redeployed in 12. I ended up getting out of the army in 2016, essentially. I initially submitted my packet to leave, but uh, First Sergeant Goodman and Captain Wolf kind of talked to me and more or less convinced me to stay in. So, so I did. I did that and tried to get the motivation back, but I just could never do it. So I ended up just using the time plan what I wanted to do, post army. So when I got out, I, um, I decided to go back to school. I moved to Washington. The last place I was stationed was Kansas, and moved back to Washington. And then decided to go back to school. Originally wanted to be a nurse, so I was taking all the prerequisites for that. And then I found out about um, echocardiography, where essentially you're doing ultrasounds of someone's heart. So found interest in that more so than being a nurse. The last thing I want to do, I guess, is wipe shit off patients.
Sure.
So yeah, so I found this specialty, went to school for it, and then I've been doing it you know for the past 2.5 years now. So I mean, had to go back to another 4 years of school, unfortunately. Should have just been a doctor, honestly, with all the schooling I've done so far. But I don't regret it. It's now I'm actually making a difference in people's lives, right? Actually changing like their care plans and how doctors view the sickness that they're going through, a disease that, and then it's I guess it's rewarding in a sense. So I feel like it's just me trying to make up for everything, just give back. And this is kind of me making up for the guilt I feel about Sergeant P's death, trying to make changes in people's lives. So it's kind of where I am now. I mean, do I regret joining the military? I guess not really. I do kind of this past November, I guess. You think about like for Thanksgiving, you think about what you're thankful for, and kind of look back, reflecting on my time in the army, and if I didn't make that step, to join, I wouldn't be where I am today. Who knows what I'd be doing? But I'm, kind of proud that I've done what I've done, and I'm doing what I'm currently doing, and it's rewarding. So yeah, I guess that's kind of it.
Okay, I'd like to ask some follow-up questions if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So did you engage in any mental health treatment while you were active duty or after you got out?
Active duty wise, no, I didn't. But once, and then while I was in school for like the whole nursing and then the cardiac sonography, I attempted to. Um, I did go to the VA and I saw a psychologist, and then they weren't specialized enough to kind of help me with like
Yeah.
by the mental issues I was suffering, the PTSD. So she stepped me up with like some specialists and trying to schedule it. Like, I mean, it's was incredibly difficult. So apparently they only work, Monday to Friday from 9 to 5 type of thing.
Mhm.
And here I am going to school or working. I just the time just never synced up. So I attempted for like 2 years to try to get help. And yeah, so I mean, within the 2 years, obviously it was like on and off,
Mhm.
right? So I would try and then nothing would happen. Then I try again. Um, so yeah, after those 2 years, I just kind of really stopped attempting to. Um, but as far as has it ever really shown or like have I ever really displayed any like severe forms of PTSD or like have any like, nightmares and things of that nature? I've never really experienced that. Um, More so there'd be, every time like it's like an anniversary of Sergeant P's death, I feel more definitely feel a little more emotional in that sense. The guilt starts to build back up a little bit. But outside of that, I mean, I can't say I've ever really, displayed aggression or anger, um, drank myself into a stupor or anything like that. I feel like it's been normal, kind of like a normal everyday life for me in a sense. I've kind of more focused on what I wanted to do. I think I used probably my job and, schooling as a method of coping, in a sense where I just stay busy and not necessarily think about it all too much. So I feel like fortunate in the sense that I don't suffer from what other people go through. But at some point, I probably should and will kind of seek counseling and mental health again and try that whole thing again. So just to like talk about it. I mean, at the end of the day, do I feel like it's going to help me? I don't know. But at the same time, I'm trying to keep an open mind about it
Mhm.
and kind of see what they do have to offer and what they feel like they can do to help in a sense.
Is there anything you can think of that's helped you stay resilient through this? I mean, when you think about like this wide range of things like family support or the perspective you have on things, what do you think is some of these variables that keeps you, able to function to move forward?
Ah, man, I feel like realistically, I've always been kind of just mentally resilient
Mhm.
on my own. Because I guess growing up, I had to rely on myself more than, anybody else. Like my father wasn't necessarily there. Really, he was present, but not really there as like a father figure, right? So I always had to rely on myself to get things done. And yeah, I mean, as far as like friends and family showing support and things like that, I've never really relied on that. Um, s- so really, for me, it's just been more about like self-reflection and ruminating on the past and kind of creating like an understanding for myself. Like I would just relive the moment or go through it in my mind and kind of think to myself, it's like how did that affect me? Like how
Huh.
and yeah, so I mean I just kind of think like how it affects my life. Is there, what can I do to really change anything? I guess maybe I'm my own counselor in a sense. And just part of it, also helps because I did have a girl, like a therapist as a girlfriend.
Mhm.
So I mean, she would always. she kind of told me about how she goes about, talking to like, so she was like a child therapist or family therapist stuff. She would talk about like her methods of kind of solving like some of the mental issues these kids were going through. And I kind of just asked myself the same questions, right? So yeah, I mean it's a lot of self-reflection, and it's kind of coming up with like my own way forward. And if some people, I mean, as far as like receiving help, it's I feel like the first step is kind of, doing the self-reflection. Like some people need it, some people don't. Right. In my sense, I feel like I necessarily don't, but open to trying. However, some people, they're on the extreme end where they do kind of like fall off the edge in a sense, where they do, resort to drugs, they do resort to alcohol, and their behaviors become rather violent or, inappropriate, in the eyes of the public.
Mhm.
So I think it's part of it is just kind of, reflecting on yourself and like, do I need help? Asking yourself that question, and just being open to feedback from other people,
Mhm.
right? If your spouse is saying, "Hey, perhaps you should seek help." I mean, the majority of the time, the answer is to like shut it out, right? Shut out their advice and lash out, because that's like the easier response. Right? And anger is like the easiest emotion to kind of express. So it's, I mean, yeah, just taking the time, like listen to people, and if they're, especially your spouse, if your spouse is the one telling you, I mean, they love you, they care for you.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, they want what's best for you. So just really kind of being, I think being open minded and listening would be is good. It's yeah, I think that's it. I mean, again, I feel like I'm fortunate enough to not have suffered as extremely as others, especially considering the things I've seen.
Mhm.
Maybe it's suppressed. Maybe I repressed it or compartmentalized it enough that you know doesn't necessarily bother me to the point where it is affecting my daily life.
Mhm.
But no,
So while you were active duty, I know you said you didn't seek out any mental health treatment. And I just want to ask, I mean, I was part of that system and that culture, so I have some inkling of why people don't seek it, but in your own words, why, while you were active duty, why did you decide not to seek out mental health treatment?
I got
Particularly from within the military.
right. I think part of it was just from that one experience while we were deployed, right? When they came in and nothing was really done. We just sat around again, talked about it, and I know I said before, talking about it's probably like the best thing to do, but for them, it just seemed like I don't know. It was just probably maybe not as engaged. They just didn't seem to really care,
Boom.
right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess because of that, just kind of, I just didn't seek it out while I was active duty. And then also, there's that perspective in the military, right, where it's if you seek mental health, you're weak, or and it's kind of looked down upon. I know they were trying to change that, as closer to when I got out. I believe like the what was it the command sergeant major of the army had like that whole video where he's like, "Oh, I seeked out help and this and he was open about it." Um, but again, yeah, that was more towards the end of me getting out of the army. Well, from like 2012 onward, yeah, it's looked down upon. Didn't seem like anyone cared really at the end of the day. So I just didn't even bother to seek it out.
Okay. I appreciate you sharing that. And then I'm going to leave it open if you have any final thoughts, anything else you'd like to say that wasn't covered, just yeah, the floor is yours for anything else.
Um, yeah, I guess something I'm very proud of, I guess, for my deployment. I can proudly say I shit on Afghanistan. It was long story short, we had a mission and I had to take shit like midway through the mission. Like it was and there's I'm not gonna shit in the vehicle or anything. So I this was during like one of those bigger named ops. We had a field artillery unit that was with us. They were acting as infantry, right? So a lot of field artillery, since there's no use for it, was designated as infantry units. So we had like a huge infantry like company with us, and then we were like the lead unit. And I just called an all stop. Had the vehicles kind of surround where I would be, and then I jumped out of my vehicle and just squatted right in the middle of the road and
Oh yeah.
took a shit. Uh, yeah, I'm proud of that moment, I guess. As
Well, it's great
terrible
to
as that
be
may
able to
sound.
say. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it is. But aside from that, I mean, if anyone is like suffering from like mental health and anything along those lines, so like it definitely is important to, listen to your spouse and seek the help that's needed, especially, I mean, because I'm sure deep down, if you're lashing out or if you're, relying on drugs and alcohol, deep down subconsciously that, you know, something's not right. So if you feel if you feel that way, I mean, definitely reach out and seek help. You don't have to go directly to like a mental health counselor or anything along those lines. You reach out to like your friends and things like that, your spouse specifically. They could help you take the steps needed, right? But another thing, I would be curious. I know like all of these like significant events and trauma, feeds into like PTSD. But what we did, we were route clearance. We fucking experienced explosions, concussions. And it'd be interesting to know how like CTE kind of affects, like the PTSD and the severity of, what
Sure.
people experience. 'Cause, I mean, you see the football players nowadays, you see how their personality was before, and then, as that CTE progresses, it gets progressively worse, and hear about suicides on their end too. So it'd be like the correlation between CTE and PTSD, how it affects it. Be very interesting to know. Um, Especially since some people got experienced multiple IED blasts, and we
Mm.
had a guy Morales in our unit. I think he experienced five at least. um, and then the thing is, it's we can't and you can't just replace guys, right? You can't take them out of the fight either, right? I mean, you get blown up, you take a day off, 2 days, and then you have to get right back to it. And unfortunately for him, he was before in the lead truck, and then we threw him in the back, like the back truck, and he still managed to get blown up. It's like the IEDs were like seeking him.
It's
So,
like that, yes.
yeah, so the I mean CTE plus PTSD. I'm sure there are quite a few people in our unit that is suffering from both. So it'd be
Yeah, we had a lot of varying outcomes with our unit. And yeah, I would definitely agree with that. That's going to be understudied. And we had a high number of, I think across the 14th in particular, but our company too, a lot of suicides, a lot of high profile outcomes. And yeah, that is definitely understudied.
yeah, it'd be interesting. I don't know who would be doing that study, but yeah, it's definitely understudy for sure.
Okay.
But
Any other thoughts?
Um, no, again, thank you again for, doing what you were doing, writing this book and kind of interviewing everyone, getting their perspective. And yeah, it's a tough job. I mean, you are going through a lot, and thank you for, helping people within the 20-second. I mean, what you're doing kind of like in the background. I mean, texts you were sending me earlier, I mean, it's a lot, it's rough. You're, so thank you.
No need to thank me. People deserve that. And that's, yeah, I'm happy to be in a position to help. But I would like to talk to you afterwards if you can stay on.
Sure, yeah.
Real into here. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.